I had just hoisted Karen's Honda onto her roof with a forklift and I'd do it again if I had to. Let me be clear, I didn't damage her car, I didn't break any laws, and I absolutely don't regret it. What I do regret is not doing it sooner before Melissa Crawford almost wrecked everything I built from the ground up. When someone blocks your garage entrance every single day, harasses you, and tries to destroy your livelihood, you're left with two choices: back down, or fight back. I chose the forklift. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments. This parking revenge story is spreading faster than I ever expected. And Karen's car? Still up there, a victory monument. My name's Brandon Hayes, and I run a small auto restoration shop in suburban Denver. Nothing flashy, just me, my tools, and a love for bringing classic cars back to life. For 3 years, I was the quiet neighbor, minding my business, fixing up muscle cars from the A60s and A70s, some Mustangs, Camaros, Challengers, machines that could bring grown men to tears once they roared back to life after months of careful work. That Tuesday started like any other. I was elbow deep in a 1967 Mustang convertible, cherry red, white racing stripes. Not just any car, the last gift my dad gave me before he passed. "Brandon," he said, running his hand over the scuffed paint, "this car will outlast both of USA if you take care of her." 18 months I'd been working on it, almost done, almost ready to honor the man who taught me that the most broken things could be made beautiful again. At 7:30, I rolled open the garage door, ready to move a client's Camaro to the curb so I could get to work. But there it was, a red Honda Accord parked squarely across my entrance, like a cork jammed in a bottle. Pristine, pricey, and completely blocking my shop. I figured it was a mistake, maybe someone had car trouble, parked overnight. Happens. I'm not the type to flip over small stuff. I walked around the Honda looking for a note. Nothing. Locked. No hazard lights. No sign of an emergency. I asked around at the coffee shop, the dry cleaner, the corner market. Nobody knew whose car it was. That's when I spotted Hira across the street, early 40s, business suit, clipboard in hand, standing beside a for sale sign like she owned the place. She smiled at me with the kind of look that makes you instinctively check your wallet. "Excuse me," I called, walking toward her. "Is that your Honda blocking my garage?" She looked at me like I'd asked her to solve quantum mechanics. "That's public parking," she said flatly, her voice soaked in authority. "I have every right to park there." I stayed calm, friendly. "Sure, I get that, but you're blocking my only entrance. I've got a customer's car inside, and I need to move it." She tilted her head and studied me like I was some exotic insect. "Your business," she repeated, like the word itself offended her, "is dragging down our property values." "I'm Melissa Crawford, president of the Homeowners Association and running for city council. This is a family neighborhood, not a place for industrial operations." That's when the real concern kicked in. This wasn't just someone parking carelessly, this was someone with an agenda. "Ma'am, I've been here 3 years, I said. "No complaints. I'm properly zoned, licensed, and insured. I just need you to move your car." Melissa pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of me, then another of my shop. "We'll see about that," she said, before climbing into a different vehicle, a silver SUV parked around the corner, and driving off. She left her Honda like a big red middle finger pointed right at my livelihood. I was still watching her taillights disappear when my neighbor, Dot, appeared beside me. Dorothy Fleming, a 67, retired journalist, sharp eyes and silver hair. She missed nothing. "Don't let Melissa get to you, honey," she said, giving my arm a pat. "She's been a mess since the divorce." "Divorce?" I asked. Dot leaned in. "Lost custody of her kids 8 months ago. Judge said she had control issues. She's been taking it out on everyone since." She handed me a card. "Call me if you need anything. I've been watching her little campaign for a while. You're not her first target." I stood there, holding Dot's card, staring at the Honda like it had roots growing into my driveway. I didn't yet know Melissa had already spent weeks digging into my business, filing complaints with the city, hiring a private investigator. I was still treating her like a reasonable person. But Melissa Crawford didn't play fair, and I was about to learn the hard way that being reasonable with someone like her was the fastest path to losing everything. 3 days later, I showed up to find my shop under siege. 4 vehicles parked in a perfect arc across my entrance. The Honda was still there, now joined by a black SUV, silver sedan, and red pickup. It was coordinated, deliberate, like someone had planned an automotive ambush. I stood there with my coffee going cold, staring at what looked like the opening move in a very personal war. A woman in her 50s stepped out of the SUV, followed by a man emerging from the pickup. Both were carrying clipboards and wore matching polo shirts embroidered with Neighborhood Watch across the chest. "Good morning." The woman chirped like we were old friends meeting at a backyard barbecue. "I'm Janet Mills, and this is Bob Peterson. We're here monitoring traffic safety in the area." Bob gave a serious nod, clicking his pen with the kind of intensity you only see in people who feel they've finally found their life's purpose. "Lots of complaints about this intersection," he added, gesturing vaguely at the unremarkable corner in front of my shop. "We're just documenting patterns." That's when it hit me this wasn't some random patrol. These two were part of Melissa's army. They weren't concerned citizens. They were foot soldiers for the homeowners association, following direct orders. "Look," I said, doing my best to keep calm, "I just need to get a customer's car out. Can you move, even just a little, so I can get through?" Janet checked her clipboard as if consulting a weather report. "We're on public property," she replied. "First Amendment, freedom of assembly." Bob nodded again, jotting something down. "We're providing a public service, just making sure everything's safe and legal around here." And that's when I made my first real mistake. Instead of calling a tow truck or the police, I decided to be nice. I figured I could kill them with kindness. I went back inside, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and brought out a tray of donuts from the bakery down the street. "If you're going to be here a while," I said, offering breakfast, "might as well be comfortable." Janet lit up like I just handed her a lottery ticket. "How thoughtful!" she exclaimed, grabbing 2 donuts. Bob helped himself to 3. They pulled out folding lawn chairs apparently stashed in the suva and settled in like they were gearing up for a parade. My attempt at diplomacy was seen as weakness. Within an hour, they'd called in reinforcements. 2 more association members arrived, also armed with clipboards and the smug sense of civic duty. By noon, there were 6 of them stationed in front of my shop, all claiming to be conducting a traffic safety study. They took photos of every customer who approached, wrote down license plates, made loud comments about industrial noise every time I used a power tool. One of my afternoon appointments circled the block 3 times, then gave up and drove off without ever getting out of the car. That evening, after Melissa's people finally packed up and left, Dot showed up at my door holding a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "Brandon, honey, you need to see this," she said, settling into my office chair like she was about to deliver a bad medical diagnosis. I did some digging on our friend Melissa. She opened the folder and spread out newspaper clippings, public records, and printed emails. "See this?" she said, pointing to a photo of a cheery little cafe. Copyright, coffee shop on Maple, forced to shut down last year. 6 months of non-stop complaints. The next photo showed a flower boutique with a going out of business sign in the window. "Same pattern," Dot said. "Noise violations, parking complaints, zoning challenges." The owner spent more on lawyers than on Rosessa. Eventually gave up. Then she held up a third photo, an antique store with boarded windows. "Mrs. Patterson ran that place for 20 years. Melissa moved in, and it took 8 months to run her out." Dot leaned back and studied me. "There's a pattern, Brandon. She targets any business that doesn't match her vision of the perfect suburban utopia." I flipped through the pages. The documentation was overwhelming. Of 47 complaints Melissa had filed against various businesses in the last 2 years, most had been dismissed. But that didn't matter. The process alone needed time, money. Stress was enough to ruin people. "This is her campaign platform," Dot said. "She's running for city council on a promise to clean up the neighborhood. Every business she crushes becomes another feather in her cap." Then I saw the final page. It made my blood run cold. A screenshot of Melissa's campaign website. Front and center was a photo of my shop, with the headline, "Industrial Blight in Residential Areas." The article described my restoration business as a garage operation that attracts transient mechanics and contributes to neighborhood decline. It was clean, professional, and entirely dishonest. Melissa didn't just want me to move my car, she needed me to fail so she could win. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the flower shop owner, the antique dealer, the cafe tilde copyright that had probably been someone's dream. How many small businesses had Melissa crushed on her way to city council? I thought about the Mustang waiting patiently in my garage, about my father's hands on the wheel, about his voice, "Take care of her." Some things are worth fighting for even when the fight seems impossible. The next morning, I learned just how impossible it was about to get. I arrived at my shop to find 3 notices taped to my door, one from the health department, one from the fire marshal, and one from the EPA. Each required immediate inspections and compliance with regulations I didn't even know existed. The health department wanted to inspect my food service facility because someone reported I was running an unlicensed restaurant. The fire marshal wanted to verify that my sprinkler system met industrial manufacturing codes. The EPA needed to investigate reports of hazardous waste disposal. 3 agencies, 3 bureaucratic threats, each one perfectly designed to drain my time, money, and mental stamina. This wasn't random, it was a targeted strike. Melissa wasn't trying to win a disagreement, she was trying to destroy my livelihood with the full power of the local government. That's when I finally realized, when you're up against someone with political connections and no conscience, being in the right isn't enough. You have to be smarter, tougher, more ruthless. Unfortunately, I was still thinking like a reasonable man. In a battle where reason no longer applied, the health department inspection found my coffee maker violated commercial food service regulations, slapping me with a $2,000 fine. The fire marshal ruled that my 1970s electrical system didn't meet current industrial codes even though it worked just fine for an auto shop, tacking on another $3,000. Then came the EPA. I'd been disposing of used motor oil through a licensed recycling company, but their permit had expired 6 months ago. That mistake cost me $5,000 more, plus mandatory remediation expenses. I sat alone in my office at 2 in the morning, drowning in legal notices and unpaid invoices. My savings had plummeted from $12,000 to $800. My business insurance had shot up from $150 a month to $400 because of the violations. And 3 of my regular customers had gone elsewhere, unwilling to navigate the blockade Melissa had created around my shop. I was being crushed by bureaucracy. Every time I caught my breath, another wave of paperwork knocked me down. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was the helplessness. Every complaint, every inspection, every penalty technically legitimate. The health department did have rules about coffee makers. The fire marshal was enforcing real codes. The EPA truly required documented waste disposal. Melissa had exploited every inch of the system, identifying tiny gaps in compliance and weaponizing them with surgical precision. It was all perfectly legal, and nearly impossible to defend against. Then, a flicker of light in the darkness of Frank Morrison, the city inspector assigned to my case, turned out to be my old roommate from community college. After another exhausting inspection, he pulled me aside, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Brandon, I'm sorry," he said, glancing around to make sure no one could hear. "These complaints, they're coming from the top, city council level. I've been told to investigate every single one, no matter how absurd." He showed me a memo from his supervisor. Crawford complaints require immediate response and thorough documentation. Frank had spent hours measuring the noise from my air compressor, about as loud as a washing machine. He logged the scent from my paint booth even though it was fully ventilated and up to code. He photographed my unsecured hazardous materials, which turned out to be a locked cabinet containing standard body shop supplies. "This isn't normal," he whispered. "I've never seen this kind of pressure aimed at one small business." The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, during yet another inspection. I'd been forced to move vehicles out of the shop. As I rolled my father's Mustang back inside, the wheels slipped on wet leaves. The car slid sideways straight into my workbench. Metal scraped metal. The corner of the bench door gashed down the passenger door straight through the original paint to the bare steel. 18 months of careful restoration gone in seconds. All because I'd been distracted and rushed. I stood staring at the damage, feeling something crack open in my chest. This wasn't just a carrot, it was a piece of my father, a promise I'd made to keep his memory alive. That gash wasn't just in the paint, it was in me. That night, I called my ex-wife Sarah for the first time in 6 months. "Maybe you should just move the shop," she said after I explained everything. "Find a new place. This isn't worth it, Brandon." I wanted to tell her that moving was more than expensive, it was surrender. That giving up meant the bullies won. "I shouldn't have to move," I said. "This is America. I have rights." But even as I said it, I could hear how hollow it sounded. Sarah sighed, the same sigh she'd used during our divorce when I refused to compromise. "Brandon, you're being stubborn again." "Sometimes, the smart thing is to walk away from a fight you can't win." There was a long silence. Then she said, "Call me when you figure out what matters more, being right or being happy." The dial tone was the loneliest sound I'd heard in years. I went back to the garage and sat beside the Mustang, running my fingers over the ruined door. The shop was silent, just the hum of the fluorescent lights and the soft patter of rain. 20 years of building a business, 3 years fighting to make it work, 18 months restoring the car, all of it threatened by one woman's ambition. I thought of the flower shop, the antique dealer, the coffee shop. How many of them had sat just like this, wondering when the final blow would land? It came the next morning, in the form of a certified letter from the city zoning office. Someone had filed a complaint claiming I was operating outside my permitted use classification, auto restoration, they said, counted as light manufacturing and not standard automotive repair. I had two choices: reclassify my business, a 6-month process that cost $8,000, or shut down. The letter was signed by the zoning director, but I recognized the phrasing. It was lifted straight from Melissa Crawford's campaign website. I sat alone in my shop, holding the paper that could end everything I'd worked for. I had $800 in the bank. I needed $8,000 to stay legal, 30 days to figure it out or close permanently. The Mustang sat in the corner, her damaged door like a war wound. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I seriously considered walking away. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe the smart thing was to give up. Let Melissa win. Let her cross my business off her list and move on to the next target. But as I sat in the silence, something shifted inside me. I thought about Dot's folder, the stack of destroyed dreams. I thought about Frank's quiet apology. I thought about how easy it would be for Melissa to do it again, and I realized that this wasn't about me anymore. This was about whether bullies win just because they're more ruthless. I looked at the Mustang, at the scar that marked everything I'd already lost, and made a decision. The next morning, I started fighting back. Not with lawyers, not with appeals. I couldn't afford those anymore. Instead, I started studying the system she was using against me. If Melissa could wield bureaucracy like a weapon, then I could learn to use it as a shield. For 3 sleepless nights, I pored over city ordinances, zoning laws, and municipal codes, determined to understand how one person could orchestrate such relentless official harassment. What I uncovered was even worse than I'd feared. Melissa's complaints weren't random. They were part of a calculated campaign exploiting every vulnerability in the city's regulatory system. She filed noise complaints during my busiest hours, ensuring inspectors recorded elevated decibel levels. She reported environmental violations during oil changes, knowing spills were more likely. She cited traffic congestion during peak pickup times, creating a paper trail that painted my business as a public nuisance. But her obsessive pattern of complaints also revealed something valuable: she was breaking rules, too. While reviewing parking ordinances, I discovered her Honda had violated multiple codes for months. She routinely parked in handicapped spots without a permit, blocked fire hydrants, and overstayed limits in metered zones. Her registration had expired 3 months earlier, technically rendering her car an abandoned vehicle eligible for impound. I started documenting every violation with the same relentless precision she had used against me: time-stamped photos, measurements, witness statements. I uncovered that her campaign headquarters operated without a business license, her neighborhood watch meetings exceeded allowable noise limits, and her real estate signs violated municipal sign codes. For every complaint she'd filed against me, I found 3 infractions of her own. I brought my findings to Dave Sullivan, an old friend from high school who had gone on to become a lawyer. He met me at his office on a Saturday morning, looking as sleep-deprived as I felt. He spread my evidence across the conference table, eyes wide with disbelief. "Brandon, this is incredible," he said, lifting a photo of Melissa's Honda parked in front of a fire hydrant. "You've got enough here to shut down her whole operation. This one alone is grounds for immediate removal." "Can I actually do something about it?" I asked. Dave grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen in weeks. "Oh, you can do more than something. City Ordinance 247.3 gives any licensed commercial operator the right to relocate vehicles blocking emergency access routes. You still have your forklift operator's license, right?" I nodded. "And her car is definitely obstructing hydrant access. Then legally, you can move it anywhere that doesn't obstruct emergency services." I blinked, surprised by the simplicity of it. "Define anywhere." Dave leaned back in his chair, grinning. "The law just says it must be moved to a legal, non-obstructive location. It doesn't say how far, or in what direction." I'm a lawyer, not a physicist. That afternoon, I conducted a technical rehearsal. Using my forklift, I carefully relocated an old Buick from the backlot to the front, practicing a lifting technique I hadn't used in 15 years. With forklifts, patience is key. Rush the job and you risk damaging both the car and your equipment. I needed this to be flawless. Melissa would jump on any excuse to claim damage. Caleb Rivera, my 22-year-old apprentice, watched the session with mounting excitement. "Boss, are you really going to do what I think you are going to do?" he asked. I'd hired Caleb 6 months earlier. He came from a rough background and had found a kind of refuge in my shop. When I'd cut his hours due to mounting fines, he'd offered to work for free just to stay on. "Sometimes the only way to stop a bully is to speak their language," I told him, adjusting the forklift arms beneath the Buick, "and sometimes that language involves heavy machinery." The plan was simple. Wait for Melissa's next gym session every Saturday from 6 to 8 a.m. Then professionally relocate her Honda to a place she couldn't ignore. I'd researched residential roof load capacities, compact car weight distribution, and emergency access legal requirements. Everything would be technically legal, professionally executed, and fully justified by city ordinance. On Friday night, I sat in my office drafting a note to leave on her windshield. Vehicle relocated per City Ordinance 247.3. Emergency access route obstruction. No damage to vehicle or property. Professional crane service recommended for safe removal. All parking violations documented and attached. Have a blessed day. Brandon Hayes, licensed automotive specialist. I made copies of every citation, every statute, and every photo. Agreed to monitor the event from her window and record it with her security system. "Honey, I've been waiting 30 years for someone to stand up to that neighborhood bully," she said. Adjusted her camera to frame the perfect angle of Melissa's house. "I just never imagined it would involve a forklift," she said with a bemused smile. Caleb volunteered to live-stream the entire operation, ensuring we had a real-time record that could defend against any claims of property damage or illegal activity. As I prepped for what I had begun calling Operation Honda Relocation, I thought back to something my father told me 2 decades ago. "Son, sometimes the right thing and the smart thing are the same thing. You just have to be patient enough to see the opportunity." Melissa had spent months teaching me about systematic harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and how to weaponize municipal systems. Tomorrow, I would return the favor with a lesson in physics, creative problem-solving, and the unforeseen consequences of parking illegally in front of someone with heavy equipment and nothing left to lose. Saturday at 6 a.m. sharp I stood in my garage, checking the forklift one last time. The diesel engine had been serviced, the lifting arms were clean and correctly positioned, and I'd triple-checked the weight distribution calculations to ensure I could lift a Honda Accord without damaging either the car or its destination. Through my office window, I watched Melissa's silver SUV back out of her driveway and head to the gym right on schedule. She was as predictable as a sunrise. I'd been tracking her Saturday routine for 3 weeks. She would be gone exactly 2 hours. Caleb arrived with 2 coffees and a laptop. "You sure about this, boss?" he asked as he set up his camera. Legally sure. I handed him a packet with the ordinance highlighted and supporting case law annotated in the margins. Caleb, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. That car has been blocking emergency access for 4 months. Fire trucks can't reach the hydrant, and ambulances can't clear the intersection. I have full legal authority to remove the obstruction. I started the forklift. Its diesel engine purred like a well-fed cat. Dot appeared at her window, flashed me a thumbs up, and disappeared back inside to monitor everything on her security system. The neighborhood was still just the distant buzz of lawnmowers and the low hum of my forklift as I eased it into position. Melissa's Honda sat where it always did, smug and untouchably, a shining symbol of how some people believe rules only apply to others. The lift itself took less than 5 minutes. I positioned the forklift arms beneath the car's frame at the exact points specified in the manufacturer's service manual, ensuring there was no pressure on the body panels or drivetrain. Slowly, steadily, the car rose in a graceful, controlled as if it had always been destined to fly. Caleb narrated for the live stream, his voice calm and professional, though tinged with awe. The vehicle is being lifted using proper safety protocols. No damage to the car or surrounding property. Transporting the vehicle took another 10 minutes. I drove slowly, cautiously, testing the car's stability with each turn. The Honda rode atop the forklift like a dignitary in a parousia, majestic and inevitable. Windows opened, doorways filled. Neighbors appeared, drawn out by the surreal spectacle. Mrs. Chen, 2 houses down, dropped her coffee mug when she saw us pass. A teenage boy across the street immediately whipped out his phone and started recording. Melissa's house was the epitome of suburban control, a perfectly trimmed lawn, hedges sculpted with military precision, not a single leaf out of place. The roof was a sturdy, ranch-style structure built in the 1980s with steel beam reinforcement. According to my research, it could easily support the weight of a compact car. I had studied the building permits, reviewed the architectural blueprints, and calculated the load distribution to the pound per square foot. Everything about this operation was professional, legal, and meticulously justified. The placement itself, a masterpiece. I raised the Honda slowly to roof level, then used the forklift's precise hydraulic controls to align it perfectly. The car settled onto the peak of Melissa's roof with a soft, decisive thud, balanced, secure, and strangely majestic. From the ground, it looked like a giant toy car casually left on a dollhouse roof, equal parts surreal and poetic. I climbed down, walked up to her front door, and taped my carefully prepared documentation packet right where she'd be sure to see it. The note laid out exactly what I had done, why I had done it, and how she could retrieve her vehicle safely. It included copies of every parking violation she'd committed, the municipal code she'd ignored, and the legal statutes that empowered my actions. The documentation wasn't just thorough, it was bulletproof. Meanwhile, Caleb's livestream had already drawn over 1,000 viewers. The comments poured in, a mix of shock, admiration, and curiosity. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. The broken bar, how is this legal?" Caleb answered patiently, explaining the emergency access laws, the documented violations, and the precise, professional execution of the plan. His stream created a real-time digital alibi, irrefutable proof that this wasn't vandalism, it was enforcement. After returning the forklift to the shop and cleaning the equipment, I resumed my usual Saturday routine. From my office window, I could still see the Honda, now perched like a bizarre monument to consequence, silent, white, and absolutely immovable. Neighbors strolled by in groups, snapping photos, whispering, laughing. The story was already spreading through the community like wildfire, and with every retelling, Melissa's months-long campaign of harassment looked more and more absurd. 8:15 a.m. Melissa's silver SUV turned onto our street. I watched as she pulled into her driveway, got out, and glanced up. She froze. For 30 solid seconds, she just stood there, mouth slightly open, trying to comprehend the sight of her Honda Accord calmly resting on her roof. Then she screamed. It was a primal, furious wail that echoed across the neighborhood, setting off barking dogs and sending kids running toward the noise. Within minutes, half the block had assembled to see what the commotion was about. The next hour was pure chaos. Melissa called the police, then the fire department, then the city council. She cycled through every agency and official she could think of, leveling accusations that ranged from vandalism to terrorism. She demanded arrests, lawsuits, emergency action. Officer Martinez arrived first. He calmly surveyed the situation, reviewed my documentation, and inspected the car. The Honda was undamaged. The forklift tracks were clean. Everything was, by the letter of the law, completely justified. "Ma'am, your car appears to be fine," he said. "Do you have any evidence that Mr. Hayes acted illegally?" Melissa pointed furiously at her roof. "He put my car on my house." "That's not illegal, ma'am," Martinez replied, glancing over the documents again. "That's creative. And according to these records, your vehicle was parked in violation of multiple city codes." He handed her the packet. "You might want to call a crane service." The reaction from the neighborhood was instant. Residents who had once been intimidated by Melissa's campaign of complaints now spoke up with sudden confidence. Mrs. Chen thanked me for standing up to her. Bob Peterson, who had been part of the initial blockade, apologized and admitted Melissa had pressured him into it. Even Janet Milsom, Melissa's most loyal supporter, mumbled something about the homeowners association may be going a little too far. By noon, by Sunday evening, the story had gone far beyond anything I could have imagined. Caleb's live stream had racked up over 50,000 views, and copies of the video were now flooding social media. Local newsrooms, bombarded with calls, took notice. Monday morning, Channel 7 rolled up outside my shop with a satellite truck and a very enthusiastic reporter named Tom Bradley. "This is Tom Bradley with Channel 7 News," he announced into the camera, voice brimming with excitement. "We're following the incredible story of a neighborhood dispute that ended with a car being placed on a roof using a forklift." Brandon Hayes, the local business owner behind the operation, has become an overnight internet sensation after his unorthodox solution went viral. He turned to me with a reporter's gleam, the kind that says this story is ratings gold. "Mr. Hayes, can you walk us through what happened here?" I laid it out: the harassment, the complaints, the mounting pressure, and finally, the legal research that led to Operation Honda Relocation. Tom listened intently, nodding as I showed him the documentation of the parking violations, the emergency access laws, the ordinance that backed every move I'd made. "So you're saying this was completely legal?" "Completely," I replied. "Fire trucks need access to hydrants, ambulances need room to maneuver, and property owners have the right to remove obstructions. That's the law." Then came a curveball. "We've received multiple calls from other business owners who say they've faced similar harassment. Are you aware you're not the first person to have issues with Miss Crawford?" I looked over at Dot, standing just behind the camera crew, clutching a thick folder of evidence. She gave a small, encouraging nod. "Yes," I said slowly, "I've learned that this pattern of harassment goes back years. Other business owners have been forced to close, relocate, or live under constant threat because of systematic complaints and bureaucratic pressure." That's when the story really took off. Joe's copyright copyright Dez, who once ran a food truck across town, appeared on camera. His voice trembled as he spoke. "She filed 17 complaints in 3 months of health violations, fire codes, zoning. She used every agency she could to shut me down. I lost everything, my license, my truck, my livelihood, all because I parked in front of her real estate office." Then came Mrs. Patterson, the elderly owner of the antique shop Melissa had run out of business. She brought boxes of evidence, complaint letters, fines, legal threats. Her hands shook as she lifted them. 20 years I ran this store, 20 years of serving this community. Melissa Crawford destroyed it in 8 months. Tears welled in her eyes as the camera captured the heartbreak. Then Channel 7's investigation dropped like a bombshell. Melissa Crawford had filed over 200 complaints in the past 3 years. Result: 11 business closures, 5 forced relocations. Every case followed the same pattern: target, complain, pressure, eliminate. And her campaign website, it proudly listed these outcomes as evidence of her dedication to neighborhood improvement. The media attention triggered a tidal wave of community backlash. Residents who had been too intimidated to speak out suddenly found their voices. The Homeowners Association received 47 resignations in just 2 days, with former members citing a culture of coercion and fear. Even Bob Peterson, once part of Melissa's infamous blockade, stepped forward publicly. She threatened to report my home business for zoning violations if I didn't cooperate. "I'm sorry, I should have spoken up sooner." Melissa, though, wasn't backing down, not by a long shot. On Tuesday morning, she called a press conference. Melissa held a press conference on her front lawn, framed, rather poetically, by her Honda still perched on the roof behind her. "Brandon Hayes is a dangerous individual who vandalized my property and endangered public safety," she declared to the handful of reporters in attendance. "His reckless actions could have caused serious injury or damage. I am calling for his immediate prosecution and the revocation of his business license." It was a performance straight out of a political playbook, measured, rehearsed, and dripping with self-righteous indignation, but it backfired spectacularly. Online viewers instantly caught the disconnect. Her calm, polished delivery set against the absurd backdrop of her car, still comically balanced atop her roof, was too much to take seriously. "She's literally standing in front of proof she's been parking illegally for months," one comment read. "This woman destroyed dozens of small businesses, and she's upset about a car on her roof," said another. Then Channel 7 dropped the bombshell. Their investigative segment aired that evening, laying out Melissa's harassment campaign in damning detail. Interviews with 11 different business owners, documentation of over 200 complaints, city records showing that 70% of her reports had been dismissed as baseless, and finally, a screenshot of her campaign website, where she proudly listed her neighborhood cleanups, a euphemism for shutting down businesses she didn't like. The public response was swift and brutal. Her real estate clients began canceling contracts, citing concerns about her aggressive tactics. The Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting and voted to remove her as president by a staggering margin of 83-7. Her city council campaign finished. Her own party withdrew their endorsement, issuing a terse statement. "Her methods are inconsistent with our values of fair play and community cooperation." The final blow came with the bill for the crane service that removed her car, $2,800, labeled as an unusual extraction scenario. The car itself was unscathed aside from a healthy coat of bird droppings from its 3-day stay in the sky. Melissa paid the invoice without a word, but neighbors reported seeing her throw the receipt at her front door before slamming it shut. Meanwhile, my business was thriving. The viral story brought in curious customers from 3 states away, all eager to meet the guy who put a Honda on a roof. My car restoration work, once on the brink of collapse, was now in high demand. Collectors appreciated both the quality of my craftsmanship and the creativity of my conflict resolution. Even Caleb found himself in the spotlight. His live stream footage had become a staple in news reports and online documentaries about small business harassment. He launched a weekly show called Garage Talk, where he interviewed business owners who'd faced similar battles. His calm, articulate narration during the forklift operation had turned him from a shy apprentice into a confident advocate for small business rights. But the story didn't stop there. All across the country, business owners began sharing their own experiences with bureaucratic harassment. A national conversation had started, one that questioned how easily local regulations could be weaponized by a single determined individual. Several states even introduced new legislation to curb frivolous complaints, citing the Crawford case as a textbook example of abuse. But for me, the most gratifying moment came when Dot handed me the latest edition of our neighborhood newsletter. On the front page, a photo of my shop stood proudly beneath the headline, "Local Business Stands Up to Harassment." The article celebrated my inventive response to an impossible situation, featuring testimonials from neighbors who had previously been too afraid to speak out. For the first time in months, I felt like I truly belonged in my own community again. 6 months later, I received a postcard. No return address, just a faded photo of a desert landscape and 4 handwritten words I instantly recognized. "You won. Move on." I kept that postcard pinned above my desk, not as a trophy, but as a quiet reminder. A reminder that sometimes, the only way to stop a bully is to speak their language. and sometimes that language involves a forklift and a Honda Accord on the roof. Our neighborhood had undergone a transformation that was nothing short of miraculous. With Melissa out of the picture, the Homeowners Association elected Dot as their new president. Her first act was to rewrite the organization's mission statement. The old motto focused on protecting property values through enforcement was replaced with a new vision: building community through cooperation. The change was immediate and unmistakable. People started talking to one another again instead of reporting each other to zoning boards. Yard signs came down. Front porch conversations returned. Trust began to grow where suspicion had once lived. 3 new businesses opened within months of Melissa's departure. A coffee shop took over the space that had sat empty since her last target was driven out. A young couple launched a custom bakery, specializing in ornate cakes for weddings and birthdays. And artist Rebecca Martinez converted the long-closed antique store into a gallery that showcased local painters and sculptors. Each was welcomed and not scrutinized, supported and not sabotaged. As for my shop, it became something I never imagined. The viral story brought customers from across the country, sure, but more importantly, it brought purpose. Young people began showing up curious, inspired, wanting to learn, wanting to build something real. I hired 2 new apprentices to join Caleb, who was no longer just an apprentice. He was now my full partner. Together, we started holding free workshops every Saturday, teaching high schoolers the basics of auto restoration and the deeper lessons too. About pride in your work. About integrity. About standing your ground when the odds seem stacked against you. The old 1967 Mustang, the one damaged during Melissa's campaign, had become our shop's signature piece. I had poured hours into restoring its scratched paint, its weathered body, at every detail brought back with care and precision. Now it sat proudly in our front window, a symbol of resilience and renewal. Customers often asked about it, about the story behind the restoration, and I would tell them. I'd tell them about my father's hands gripping that wheel, about his voice in my ear, reminding me to take care of the things that matter, about how even the most broken things can be brought back to life. All it takes is patience, and the will to fix what others would rather throw away. Sometimes the most broken things become the most beautiful. Frank Morrison, the city inspector who had been forced to harass my business, stopped by one afternoon. He came to apologize and to explain what had really been going on behind the scenes. The pressure from above was incredible, he admitted, genuinely ashamed. I knew the complaints were ridiculous, but I was told Crawford had political connections. I had to take her seriously. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you without risking my job. I accepted his apology. Good people sometimes get caught in bad systems. The legal aftermath of the Honda incident set important precedents for small business rights. Dave Sullivan, my lawyer, used our case to successfully defend 3 other business owners facing similar harassment campaigns. City Council passed new regulations limiting the number of complaints any one individual could file against a single business and requiring solid evidence before investigations could begin. The Crawford protocols became a model for other municipalities struggling with frivolous regulatory complaints. Caleb's documentation of the forklift operation launched him into a full-time media career. His garage talk show attracted viewers worldwide, featuring interviews with small business owners who had overcome impossible odds. He'd learned to balance technical know-how with genuine human stories, creating content both educational and entertaining. I never thought lifting a car onto a roof would teach me so much about storytelling, he said one day while editing an episode. The Honda itself became a local legend. Professional crane operators from across the region visited the shop, eager to hear the technical details of the lift. I began giving informal talks on forklift safety and emergency access laws, turning my experience into practical lessons for other business owners. The irony wasn't lost on me. Melissa's harassment had made me an expert in exactly the things she'd tried to weaponize against me. Rebecca Martinez, the artist who'd opened the gallery in Mrs. Patterson's old shop, commissioned a painting of the Honda on the roof. The piece became the centerpiece of her first solo show, Titled Impossible Solutions, it captured not only the absurdity of the situation but also the determination and creativity required to turn harassment into victory. The painting sold to a collector in California who said it reminded him of his own battles with bureaucratic bullying. The ripple effects of our story continued in unexpected ways. Business schools began using the case as a prime example of creative problem-solving under pressure. The Harvard Business Review published an article titled When Compliance Becomes Warfare, Lessons from the Crawford Case. It analyzed how regulatory systems could be weaponized and praised the importance of knowing legal rights and thinking outside the box. Dave Sullivan parlayed his success into a thriving practice specializing in small business protection. His firm now represented over 200 businesses across Colorado, helping them navigate regulatory challenges and defend against harassment. "Brandon, your case changed everything," he told me at our annual Christmas dinner. "You proved fighting back is possible even when the system feels rigged." The neighborhood's transformation was most visible at our annual block party. What used to be a tense, suspicious event had become a celebration of local business and community cooperation. Food trucks lined the streets. Local artists displayed their work. Children played games organized by neighbors who'd once filed noise complaints against each other. The contrast with Melissa's era of fear and enforcement couldn't have been clearer. I often thought about the other business owners Melissa had destroyed. Joe's copyright Mendez used his settlement to open a successful restaurant in a neighboring town. Mrs. Patterson had passed away the previous winter, but her family donated her antique collection to the local historical society. It became the foundation for a permanent exhibit celebrating neighborhood businesses. Their stories lived on as reminders of what we'd overcome. The final chapter in Melissa's story came through Dot, who kept in touch with real estate agents around the region. Melissa had moved to a gated community in Arizona and tried to become president of yet another homeowners association. But her reputation followed her. Residents quickly voted her out after learning about her history of harassment campaigns. For once, she'd encountered a community prepared for her tactics. On quiet Sunday mornings, I'd sit in my office staring at that postcard from Arizona. "You won. Move on." But I hadn't just won a battle against one difficult person. I'd learned that fighting back was possible, that creative solutions could overcome systematic oppression, that communities could choose cooperation over conflict. The Honda was gone from the roof, but the lesson it taught remained. Sometimes the most impossible problems require the most impossible solutions. Every Christmas, Dot hosted a viewing party where we watched Caleb's original live stream of the Honda Lift. Neighbors gathered with hot chocolate and cookies, laughing at the absurdity of it all but remembering the lesson beneath the humor. Kids who'd grown up hearing the story would ask if it really happened. We'd point to the faint compression marks still visible on Melissa's old roof. Physics doesn't lie, and neither do the consequences of parking illegally in front of someone with a forklift and nothing left to lose.